you kind of have to get to know your monsters and know what triggers them and bring them along for the ride, because they're going to be there. If you're going to create a great book, you're going to have these monsters that pop up, but put your focus back on the reader, and how you're going to impact them, how their life is going to be better after they read your book. And the monsters get quieter and they kind of just ride along in the back seat.
Our guest today, Julie Broad, has been nicknamed Julie the Book Broad, best known for her brilliant YouTube channel where she posts self-publishing tips and tools twice a week and extols the importance of writing and publishing a non-boring non-fiction book. So welcome, Julie. We want to hear all about that today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's one of my favorite subjects, so I'm excited to chat with you.
Hello and welcome to the Write the Book Inside You podcast. Tips, tools and interviews for coaches and healers like you who want to write a non-fiction book to boost your visibility, clients and cash flow while making a difference.
Sponsoring the show today is Caryl Westmore's book, The Inner Path of Writing. Make love, not war to the writer within. Launching February 21st, 2023. This book is collated by Caryl Westmore, who interviewed 20 world-class experts in the fields of publishing, authorship and transformation. They share how to break through your inner blocks and access your genius as a writer or creative. People are saying it's like chicken soup for the writer's soul. Buy this treasure trove of wisdom and get the accompanying bonuses valued at $500 at www.ivwbook.com. And now let's dive into today's interview.
So Julie, give us the 30,000-foot overview of your life from real estate investor in Canada to Amazon overall #1 best-selling author to running a company that helps other authors, professionals and entrepreneurs called Book Launches.
Yeah. It's always funny. People go, you're a real estate, but you run a book publishing company. But for me, real estate was never supposed to be the full-time thing. It was just there when I decided I needed to quit my job. But tenants and toilets and all that fun stuff was always meant to be a backup, like the retirement plan. It wasn't supposed to be the thing. And when my book went to #1 on Amazon, a lot of people started to approach me looking for support, and I contributed to a lot of traditionally published books. I was a content editor on one and I wrote chapters for others. And then I started to coach some of my real estate coaching clients on their books. And that stuff was way more fun. It was far more exciting than helping somebody pick up a property. And so little bit by bit, I started to get this idea for a company that I really felt was needed in the space that created books that were as good or better than a traditionally published book, but that were set up with marketing in mind from the beginning. Because what I saw over and over was the traditionally published books had a marketing plan before the author even got a book deal. Versus most people, when they self-publish, they write the book and sometimes they even load it onto Amazon and then they go, okay, now how do I sell it? And that does not set you up for success. And then I also saw a lot of people getting ripped off, which always breaks my heart. People who have great intentions, they want to have an impact, and then they hire the wrong people, or they go to one of these companies that promises you a bestseller, and all they do is, it's just such a gimmick, and it ends up hurting you and your book in the long run. So all of that combined, I just kind of dreamed up a company that I would want to hire. And if I was going to work, I wanted to have a company that I wanted to work in. So I, built Book Launchers.
and when was that first book that you published, and how many authors have you helped? So it's 2 questions. How long ago was that you set out? How many authors have you actually helped?
That was 2013 that More Than Cash Flow came out. That's the one that was #1 in print books. And then I had another book that came out in 2016. But that was just as I was starting to pivot. I was just starting to picture Book Launchers. And so I wasn't going as hard with that book because I was already kind of shifting in my mind. And then I started Book Launchers in 2017. And I think we're at 300. It's like 320, 330 authors that we've worked with.
Great. And what I love about your latest book, which we're going to look at, where the hashtag No Boring Books comes from, is that you reveal some of your own challenges and things that you've done wrong, actually, with your first 2 books. And I think that really helps to get you to a place where you can say, Yes, this is why I don't do that. One of them is the title of a book. Your second book is about the brand. Tell us about that, where it doesn't really work when you go on podcasts.
Yeah, it's such a good example. So, and I think even in real estate, a lot of the things I made as mistakes, I had these mistakes so that I could help others avoid them. That's kind of how I look at everything that goes wrong in my life. I'm like, okay, great, now I can help other people. But yeah, I named, and I did a lot of work naming the book too. It wasn't like I just pulled the name out of the hat, but I called it The New Brand You. And had I gone a little step further and done a little test, which is tell somebody the title and then ask them later on what the title was, I would have discovered that almost everybody calls it The Brand New You. It is the most bizarre thing because people will be sitting there looking right at the book and they will say The Brand New You, probably 85% of the time. It is quite wild. And so this is why we always tell our authors, like, you might love your title, but you have to do some tests, right? You want to make sure that nobody else major has that title already, because two books can have the same title, unless with the rare exception of trademarks, like Freakonomics, for example, is a trademarked title. But generally speaking, 20 books can all have the same title. That's totally fine. You can't copyright a title. So you want to make sure you're not competing with a major book in the same industry or same category as you with the same title. If you can get the URL, that's a bonus. If it's 3 words or less, that's a bonus. If it's easy to say, that's a bonus. But let's make sure it's easy to remember, because you don't want people saying the wrong book. And the real kicker is that The Brand New You is a book by Dory Clark, who is a really popular branding person. And so I do all this promotion for the New Brand You, and The Brand New You gets all this publicity.
So that's a very good tip. And playing the inner game, how does that affect you? Do you beat up on yourself and then obviously put this bright and breezy outlook that we see on the YouTube channel? But do you sometimes cry some ugly tears?
I cry all the time. That's how I survive life. But no, I mean, everybody has monsters. I call them your monsters because I actually picture mine as like kind of cute and cuddly. It takes their power away. You can cuddly monsters, like from the Monsters Inc., if anybody watches those movies. But every author we've worked with that has a level of success, because I'll clarify this, because not everyone has these monsters or lets them control them. But these monsters are valuable because they actually force you to take a different perspective and to work a little harder to make your book better. But the common monsters are fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of success. And most people have a couple of them that are quite strong. And, part of mine was always fear of judgment. I wanted people to like me. It's still there. The monster's there, but I'm very mission driven. Like, I want to help people in this world. And if I am constantly afraid of being judged, then I will not be able to have an impact. And so the monster comes along with me. He's big and green. He's got a purple eye. It's cool. Like, we're buddies now. But you kind of have to get to know your monsters and know what triggers them and bring them along for the ride, because they're going to be there. If you're going to create a great book, you're going to have these monsters that pop up. But put your focus back on the reader and how you're going to impact them, how their life is going to be better after they read your book. And the monsters get quieter and they kind of just ride along in the back seat.
As you say in your book, Self-Publish and Succeed, as you look back, you can say, I thought one interesting one was that you were turned down by a traditional publisher for your real estate book because you didn't have a big enough social media platform. It's then sent you on a journey to do what you're doing today. And at the same time, tell us a few stories of people who've got huge platforms, but only sell a few books.
Yeah. I mean, I want to touch on one piece you mentioned, which is basically every time something quote unquote bad has happened in my life, it's turned out to be one of the greatest gifts. And so now I think part of the cheery attitude that you see out there is knowing that whatever is hard is actually a gift. It's just, I don't know what the gift is yet. And that doesn't mean I'm like gloriously like, oh, great, life's miserable right now. Like, that's wonderful. That's not what I mean. But it's just knowing that every big challenge, like every obstacle you encounter is actually later on, you'll see it will be a gift, which was the rejection from Wiley. It was devastating at the time. And it took me months to recover because, I had friends that got book deals that didn't have bigger platforms than me. And they didn't sell as many books as I did in the end, but they didn't have the rejection that fueled them like I did. Because that that rejection was a gift. It forced me into self-publishing, which I think is for most authors superior to traditional publishing. And it also really fueled me to work harder than I would have worked because I was terrified nobody would buy or read my book. But I mean, as for the other side of it, we personally haven't seen a situation where an author has a good platform and they don't sell books, but I've seen it in the news of late. There's been some articles of some really like celebrity authors with 1 million plus social media followers. They get a big book deal, they get a big book signing, and the social media followers aren't translating into book sales, and publishers are starting to rethink what they need in order to make a profitable book deal. So it does happen. But what I find that we do, and I recommend to people, is if you are really aligning the book with your audience and you're clearly offering a solution to a problem that your audience has, you're going to sell books to them, because you're like self-publish and succeed is how to write a book that's going to sell. Like my nonfiction author market, that is solving a very specific problem that every author writing nonfiction has. So it moves copies because people go, oh, I need that book. And so if you write that, I think you can sell if you have an audience.
And talking of what trips us up or trips up an aspiring nonfiction author, not getting it done. And I think one of your bullet points on your description is that why aren't we finishing our books?
I mean, everybody's different. There's a variety of things I see very often. One is this feeling of making it perfect, which again is your monsters. Like most of the time it's those monsters coming out of the closet that are stopping you. But, a lot of people are going for perfection. So they're either re-editing. So you've got a really beautiful first chapter because every time they sit down to write, they're rereading and editing that first chapter over and over and over again. And then they write a few sentences and that's it. Or it's just never good enough. Like it's just not quite ready. I've met so many people who've been working on a book for 5 years. I'm just like, come on, just give it to us. Like, give it to the editors. Let's get some professional feedback and start moving it forward. Because until you get the professionals in there, you really aren't going to know what it really needs. All day long, your brain is just going to show you the same things over and over again. Okay. So I say, get your bad first draft down. Get all the content you can possibly think of, all the stories, all the ideas, get it down on paper. Read through it once and then bring in the professionals. And then you'll get your book done in a year or a year and a half instead of 5.
Okay. Not a book in a weekend, but maybe a first draft in a weekend, correct?
You could. I've never done a first draft in a weekend. I'm so busy. And I think I relate to people who have kids and a busy business. And, there's not a lot of time. Like if I can carve out 4 or 5 hours a week to write my book, then I'm thrilled. And you're not going to write a book in 5 hours a week. So people who can have the luxury, I would say, of taking the whole weekend, you might be able to get a shorter book. But again, I'm going for great. Like our books, we want greatness. This is a book you want to be proud of 10 years from now. So you might get some good content down in a weekend, but I think you're probably going to take a few months to get that first draft done.
Correct. But one of the things I have learned from your book, Self-Publish and Succeed, is the very, 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 very importance of having an outline before you sit down to write. So tell us your views on that.
I wrote my first book, More Than Cash Flow, without an outline. And it turned out okay. Like I'm very proud of that book. But when I sent it to the editor, I think they cut like 30,000 words out of it. So I wrote a lot of stuff that I didn't need to write. I obviously wasted a lot of time. It was inefficient. An outline, which is how I wrote Self-Publish and Succeed, and I worked with one of our writing coaches throughout the process, it was so much easier because when you sit down and you've only got half an hour, you know exactly what section you need to write next. And if you're struggling on one section, you can just go to your outline and go, okay, this is the section I know I can write today. And you can make use of smaller periods of time. I also recommend people do writing sprints. And sometimes I do these write with me weekends, or like 2 hours usually is what we do. And we do writing sprints and people get 1,000 to 2,000 words done in 12 minutes. And it's just a focus, like Pac-Man. I always tell people Pac-Man's coming for your words if you stop. So for 12 minutes, you're burning up that keyboard writing. And when you kind of get focused like that, you can write a lot, but you need an outline to do that. So you need to know the hook, the through line of your book, and you need to know the elements that you have to cover in order to achieve that hook for your reader. And that's what your outline needs to be. And that's the content that you need to focus on getting out.
Great. And I love that word hook. I've used it in my own giveaway. Something that you said was about having a juicy hook, and not only in the title and subtitle, but also in the chapters. And I suddenly went, aha, she's right. When you look at the chapters in a book, tell us about your view on this, the Hooky chapters themselves.
Yeah, for sure. First, I'll touch the subtitle because a lot of people don't spend enough time on the subtitle. The subtitle has to really showcase who this is for and why they need to read your book. And a lot of subtitles are way too generic. So spend time on those. But the chapters is my favorite thing because I've landed speaking gigs off of chapter titles. Our clients have landed speaking gigs and media off of great chapters. Every chapter title, you want to be brainstorming them, maybe not quite as rigorously as you brainstorm your title, but you want to make sure every chapter title sells a benefit, creates curiosity, or delivers on some sort of value. So, if you look at another book in your category and you have one chapter title that's the same as theirs, change that chapter. Because what you don't want is to have a reader open up to, click in the look inside or open up to that table of contents and go, oh, I've read this before. And I use the example of real estate books because I'd read probably 75 real estate books before I wrote mine. Every one of them had how to calculate cash flow, how to find a good area to invest in. And so I made sure my book did not have those chapter titles because I knew myself, after reading so many, I was like, oh, it's going to be the same thing. So you do not want people to think that. But if it creates curiosity or sells a benefit, somebody booking people for speaking engagements is going to go, can you do a talk on that title? Which is what happened in the new Brand You. Why it did sell some copies is because I had a chapter called You Are Who Google Says You Are. And I got invited to do quite a few talks on that subject and they bought books. And so if you can do that well, you can move copies just from one chapter title.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, that you've got in Self-Publish and Succeed talks about how to save something like 1,419 hours of your time. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of a chapter title where I'm selling a benefit. It talks about writing with a outline. That's what that whole chapter is about. And I think I touch on writing sprints in that chapter. And I also acknowledge later on that this is not a guaranteed, like I made up that number, but I made up that number for the purpose of when somebody's looking at the table of contents, it's going to make you curious and it sells a benefit, right? I'm telling you, this is how you're going to save a whole bunch of time. And they're like, why such a specific number? Well, you find out in the chapter that it's not that specific, it's made up, but it makes a point and you remembered it.
Exactly. The other thing I remembered for a no boring chapter is know your why. Now, if I write a chapter that says know your why, and I'm one of your clients, what are you going to say to me?
That and the SMART goal framework, if you put that in any of your chapters, I'm going to take that out. Yeah, it's such a common thing. Like I haven't seen it in a while, so I'm going to say people have seen my videos complaining about it, but it is so many books. For a while there, I was looking at 1 or 2 books a week that had that as a chapter. And I was like, no, like dive into, if you know your why, what actually happens in their life. And what, like in your specific genre, your specific style, whatever you're talking about, go to that place. Don't go to know your why. Like sell the outcome of knowing your why instead, because know your why is such a common chapter title. It's as common as conclusion, which is another one I tell people not to do.
Yes. So what, give us an example. I think I can remember some you gave as an alternative, like dance with your dream, or what's another way we can, instead of saying find your why, because let's face it, the inner game needs to know their why. Otherwise they'll give up. That's what pushes them and motivates them, but just don't call it a chapter. Am I right?
And that's why I said, like, so know your why is important, but when they know your why, with whatever you're talking about, what happens for them, make that the outcome-based chapter. So if knowing your why, like for me with real estate, that was something I talked about, was like, why are you investing in real estate? Well, when you know your why with real estate, you'll choose the right properties. So I would probably make a chapter title as the secret of buying the right properties for your lifestyle, or how to create the lifestyle you're dreaming of with property. And that is know your why, because so many people did what I did, which was buy these other people problem properties, which did not create the life I wanted to live. It created a lot of stress. Knowing your why shifted me to buying properties that were much lower stress. And so that's what know your why does. And so I didn't give this example in the book because I was talking about a specific client's book at the time. But for anybody out there that has know your why, go to the outcome of that knowing your why and create a hooky title from that.
I think that's a very good example, because we're going to seg now into what makes a no boring book.
Yeah, there's so many, because first of all, story. A lot of people in nonfiction just deliver material or deliver content, which is okay, but it makes something that people feel like they have to read, not want to read. And we want to create books that you want to read. Really creating a story arc, even if you're delivering a financial book that's going to be fairly intense on the numbers, you can still have a story arc throughout that book that makes somebody keep turning the pages. It doesn't mean you're creating a fictitious story, but you want to create kind of an enemy in the beginning that you're overcoming, and you're going to take them through the journey of overcoming that enemy so they get to this outcome at the end. So that's part of it. The other part of it is writing styles. And one thing I'll mention, when it comes to nonfiction, a lot of people use really big words or jargon. And they do that because of these monsters, because they're worried about the judgment from their peers. They want to sound smart. And I had to reprogram myself. After I did an MBA, I was really good at using words that didn't really mean much, that sounded really smart. That was kind of what I felt like the MBA trained me to do. I was really, really good at fluff writing. But fluff writing doesn't connect with your reader. So you want to dial it down to a grade 6 to grade 8 level on the Flesch-Kincaid score. You want to speak to the reader emotionally, right? Let's ditch the henceforth, therefore, all that kind of stuff, and just be real with the people that you're writing to. And that alone will really help make it more interesting. And then the final tip I'll give, because I could give tips on this all day long. The final tip is that you really do need to share. You don't have to open up and pour your heart out of every emotional detail, but there does need to be a point of vulnerability. You need to be sharing something in the book that makes you feel a little exposed, because that is what's going to connect with a reader. That's what's going to make somebody remember your story. And when you feel that just a little bit exposed, that kind of tells you that you've been vulnerable enough to create that connection. If you feel totally fine with everything that's in the book and you don't care if anybody in the world reads it, probably haven't gone deep enough, and it's probably going to fall a little flat.
So it's about some obstacle you overcame. For instance, being rejected by a traditional publisher in your case. I would also like to move on to a book that changed your life. You mentioned it in the beginning, and it's one of, I think, your motivators. When you were young, you watched your parents. Tell us that story.
Oh, yeah. So, the book that for me that changed my life was a book that a coworker gave to me early. I just graduated from university, and she told me to go buy this book, actually. And so I went and bought the book, and it changed how I looked at money, which is ultimately what got me into real estate investing. And most people probably are going, oh, that must have been Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because that book did change a lot of people's mindset. For me, it just started me looking at, okay, I want to create something that my money is working for me. That was kind of the big takeaway for me. Parents, they were always business owners, but they had what Rich Dad would call a job. They were self-employed people with jobs because they had to work. If they didn't show up to work, their business did not run. They ran a motel, and then they eventually ran a B&B. And so I talked about the motel and how my dad would put on his house coat at 2 a.m. because we lived off the side of a highway, and people would come in at 2 a.m. to get a room because they're tired from driving on the highway. And my dad would put on his house coat, get out of bed, go downstairs, and he would rent them a room. And that was one of the memories I had. And so it was something that always stuck in my mind and got me into real estate and created a company, that's remote. My first company was a real estate training and education company, and it was remote, and Book Launchers is remote as well. So I don't have to be available at 2 a.m, and I don't have to be in one location.
We've done the nonfiction book for a professional entrepreneur. Now, a memoir can be a legacy book. Does it also have to have a story arc and an editor, or can it just be someone telling their life story?
It depends on your goal. And that's one thing I'll never tell you there's a rule. There's in publishing, there really are very few things that I would say, this is how you have to do it. Lots of choices and options. And memoir is a great example of a choice and an option, in that, we have one client right now who, he's hired us to help him write the book, and he has no intention of publishing it. Probably put it through one round of editing, and that'll be it because it's for his family. It is a pure legacy story. And then we have others that are kind of in the middle where they do want to publish it and we are editing it, but they're not like, it's like, I'm not worried about it selling. This is for my kids and their grandkids and, that kind of thing. And then we have people who want their book to sell. And so if you want your book to sell, your story, it might be about you, but it's not for you. It is for the reader. And you have to create a storyline that the reader is going to care about. And you have to detach yourself a little bit from the details, because the challenge that we find with memoirs, first of all, if you're not famous, a memoir is tricky to sell because you're competing with celebrity names that don't even really have to have a storyline. Their name on the cover sells the book. And so you have to really think about, what is it about my story that somebody's going to care about? What's going to be better or different in their life after they read my book? And then a lot of people go, oh, well, my story is inspirational or it'll create hope. That's too generic. We have to go deeper than that. We have to find who specifically, like what type of person in what type of situation is going to be inspired. And when they're inspired, what's going to happen? Are they now going to finally find that love life, find that love of their life? Or now are they finally going to leave the job that makes them miserable and set out on something that they're passionate about? You got to go deep in order to create that, and then only give the material that matters to that storyline and that outcome. I know I have an example. I'll blur it because I don't want to reveal the client, but one book, this person was really attached to a story about her uncle. The uncle story took up a whole chapter and it did not fit with the hook. And when it came out, what do you think the reviewers said? That was really weird about that story about the uncle. The rest of the book was great.
Really?
So you gotta just focus on the storyline and the hook and take the advice of people who aren't emotionally attached to your story, because it's very hard for you to objectively see what's really going to matter to the reader.
Is there any inner game, mental, physical, and emotional tools that you use to stay focused? I mean, first of all, are you a natural extrovert to go out twice a week onto YouTube, for instance? I believe you've got a little son and a husband who does another career. How do you stay focused and aligned with who you want to be?
I'm an introvert, a very, very high introvert, in fact. So that it's always funny when people think I'm an extrovert. But YouTube and speaking are actually wonderful gifts to introverts like me, because people come to me. I'm not like, the hardest thing for me as an introvert is meeting people, because I don't like naturally go out and say, hey, hello, let's be friends. I'm usually the person standing against the wall going, okay, what time, how long till I can actually make my exit? Like, that's more accurately me. But YouTube and speaking allows people to come forward to me, and I genuinely enjoy connection. It's just not something I'm naturally pursuing myself. But as far as taking care of myself, I haven't had alcohol in, 16 years. I'm a vegetarian. I sleep 8 hours a night. I do cold plunges. The list is long. Therapy, meditation, breathing. If you run a business with a lot of, employees and contractors, there's almost 80 people on my team right now. You've got, you're writing books and you've got a family. You have to take care of yourself so you can show up for it and be there for the people in your life and not be reactive to all the crazy things, especially these days. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things, but if people are just looking like, oh, I can't do that. I mean, there's 2 tips I can offer. One is to take a walk. Like, walking is incredibly powerful. Getting outdoors. I would say, middle of the day, every day, or especially when things are stressful and you feel like you can't take a break, that's the most important time to take a 20-minute walk. Get outside, get some fresh air, walk. And the other thing I would say is layering things on, right? So, this month, maybe you wake up and your first thing you do is drink a big, tall glass of water because you're most dehydrated when you wake up in the morning. So that could be the first thing. So this month, that's all you do. That's your new habit. And then next month, maybe you're like, okay, now I'm going to wake up, have that tall glass of water and go for a 20-minute walk first thing. And build on it, because none of the things that I do, I didn't one day go, okay, these are all the things I'm going to do to take care of myself. It's been, okay, last year I added cold plunging. And so it's like you add the things on and then all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, wow, I've got this huge list of things I do to take care of myself so that I can show up for the world.
Yes, fantastic. So You've given 2 very practical tips there. And I believe to write your book, you also get up an hour earlier, although it sounds like you must go to bed early to get your sleep.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm writing, most of the time I would get up at about 5 to write, to get the hour in before my son would wake up. But yeah, I mean, I do go to bed early. I often put my son to bed at 8 and then tidy up the house and then go to bed myself. So 9 o'clock, go to bed, because sleep is vital. I mean, you need it to fight off all the germs. You need it to handle stress. Your brain needs it to organize everything that you've gone through in the day. And I'm just a nicer person when I've slept. So, so sleep is important. So yeah, I'm almost always in bed before 10 for sure.
There are many different ways that you have to, as a writer, as a creative, make profit. Wanting to make profit, you need to look after yourself. And I've learned that over the years, and it's one of my passions. And so thank you for sharing yours. Julie, is there anything else I haven't asked you that you think so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think book writing and publishing is a team sport. So no matter what your resources are, I really think that if you have limited resources and you can't necessarily hire a full service company like Book Launchers, look at your resources and figure out what you can do with them. Because first of all, books are a business, even if it's a side gig. When you write a book, you've created a business. So you need to look at, the tax write-off opportunities. So, the resource allocation. You're the CEO of this business. So you got to make decisions about, your resources. I don't think anybody can or should release a book without at least one professional editor. And then that book cover, that's everything, right? If you have a bad book cover, it's going to kill your book. So, if you have limited resources, I would say make sure you've got enough for an editor and for a book cover. And you can DIY the rest if you need to get your first book out there. I think a lot of people try to do it all themselves, and you want to have something you're not ashamed of in the future, because it's really hard to unpublish books. Like, we've had to help clients try to unpublish books. Ebooks, not so hard. Of course, you can't pull them off of people's e-readers. So they're still out there in the world. Print books are really hard to unpublish because there's all these resellers out there in the world. And the only way to get all of them off the market is to buy them. And then you still can't stop them from popping up again in the future. So, I always tell people, you want to put something out there that you're going to be proud of 10 years from now.
But you can update and change the cover, can't you? I mean, my book from 10 years ago had a picture of me then, and I've now changed it. So you can update it perhaps. But you say Absolutely. You can't unpublish a whole book that you don't want out there.
You can't, and you can't ever get the copies that are out there in the world. You'll never get those back, right? So it's one thing to update and revise and have a new edition. It's another thing, I meet a lot of people who go, oh, I'm embarrassed by that book. They just put something out really fast. They didn't have an editor on it. It's full of typos. And, they sold a couple hundred copies and they can't get those back. They don't know where they are. You never know when they'll resurface. So yeah, that's why I always say, it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be this perfectly polished thing if you're low on resources, but, do your best to make it as good as possible so that you're not regretting it when you build your platform and, tens of thousands of people know who you are. And then they pull out this thing that you put out into the world. You're like, oh, no, pretend that didn't exist.
Yes, you're right. If you sometimes look at an author page on Amazon and you look at some of the earlier books. So, Julie, I believe you have a free gift for our audience. Tell us about that.
Sure. I've got a download that will help you plan your book so that you've got that outline, you've got your audience, kind of all the important things we talked about, the hook. So you can get that at booklaunchers.com, the number 7 steps. So it's booklaunchers.com, 7 steps. And you can download that and it will help you plan a book that will sell.
Oh, that's great. Because I think you've said that without that, you can waste a lot of time. So that's a great gift. Mm-hmm. And if you had a quote or something to tell your younger self in the world of book writing, what would you say?
I always tell people the missing piece is always action. The lights are never all green. You got to just take a step. You will never see how you're going to get perfectly to the end destination. So figure out your end goal and then just take a step and just keep taking steps.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you today, telling us how to succeed on the inner game of writing, but also how to profit when we get the book out there. Thank you, Julie. Thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Want a free gift to inspire you further on your book writing adventure? My free checklist, 5 book hook tips to kickstart your book writing journey, will help you get clarity on the key essentials to make your book a winner. Download it at writethebookinsideyou.com/free gift. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, a big virtual hug and keep writing.